Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. You're watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki. And we're here all the way through until midday with a show stacked full of all those biggest stories, the biggest guests, and those talking points to get you going. So here's what's on.
Make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on GB Views at gbnews.uk. The email's there on the screen, and we'll be reading those out throughout the show, as usual. But first, it's time for the latest news.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are the latest headlines. £5.9 billion will be made available in the upcoming budget to help tackle NHS backlogs across England. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is set to announce that £2.3 billion of funding will be used to try to get waiting lists down. £1.5 billion is earmarked for increased bed capacity and new surgical hubs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. Elsewhere, Insulate Britain has restarted its road-blocking protest this morning despite the risk of members being jailed or fined. The environmental group is targeting Canary Wharf, obstructing the Limehouse Causeway. That started at 8:20 this morning. Another group of protesters is targeting Liverpool Street. Injunctions have already been imposed on some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson says they will continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. And the website of Britain's biggest supermarket, Tesco, is back up and running after a suspected hacking. The outage left customers unable to shop or track their orders over the weekend. The supermarket giant said it was an attempt to interfere with its systems, but says there's no reason to believe customer data has been affected. Shoppers may have to enter a virtual waiting room before accessing the site to manage traffic flow. I'll have more on all of those stories for you in half an hour.
Yes, good morning, everybody. This is To The Point right here on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki. And we've got an absolute belter of a show for you today with loads of those top topics and everything to get you going. So here's what's on.
Yes, Richard Ratcliffe, the husband of detained British-Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, is beginning a hunger strike outside Whitehall today to ask the government to do more to bring his wife home. We'll be live with Mr Ratcliffe to hear what he has to say.
We will indeed. Now, also in this hour, the government have said that they will provide an extra £5.9 billion to help tackle NHS backlogs. This comes as one of the UK's most senior doctors says maternity services could be on the brink of failure. We'll talk to a midwife of 40 years about what needs to be done there.
Yes, we have all that coming up and much more across the programme. And you can get in touch with your views, as usual, on gbviews at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on why it should be illegal for GPs to go on strike.
Yes, now, Rishi Sunak is set to announce around a £6 billion investment into our beloved NHS to help tackle the record waiting lists and improve digital technology. The plan is that you might finally be able to get treatment for whatever illness you have, and when you turn up to your appointment, they won't have lost your notes and have no record of who you are or why you're there. It comes as it's been revealed that nearly 6 million people in England are waiting to start routine hospital treatment, a record high. Of those, some 9,754 people have been waiting more than 2 years to begin hospital treatment, more than 3 times the 2,722 people who were waiting longer than 2 years in April. Among them are people awaiting hip and knee replacements and cataract surgery. NHS England has told hospitals to eliminate all waits of more than 2 years by March 2022. But the situation is now so dire that there's been a 20% increase in people's self-funding operations. Not just minor operations, but things like a heart bypass, for goodness sake, which costs around £17,000. So you can put a price on life, apparently. A total of £2.3 billion of the funding package will be specifically used to transform and set up diagnostic centres across England, with the 100 one-stop shop units in addition to those 44 ones already in existence. The plan is that you should be able to get tested for things like cancer there, and then that will help you get a quicker diagnosis. Now, all of this seems OK. It seems like a relatively creative response to a crisis that might help tackle the two biggest problems: waiting times, slow diagnoses. But I don't think this is going to work unless the actual biggest problem is tackled: the attitude of many people who currently work within our NHS. I'm calling right now for it to be made illegal for GPs to go on strike. The British Medical Association is threatening that GPs could strike at some 6,600 practices in England, not because of pay, not because of working conditions, but because they don't want to be named and shamed if they don't see patients face to face. The police are legally banned from striking, so why not GPs? We're pumping money into the NHS. We're in the middle of the biggest crisis the NHS has ever faced, and these new measures by Sunak won't help to reduce the backlog of waiting lists unless our GPs actually stay in work. We need our GPs in work. And whilst I'm sure that we all hope that common decency, common sense, a sense of duty, the inability to sleep at night if you go on strike and people die, would compel them to stay in their surgeries, well, that's not the reality, sadly, is it? So maybe the government should be the ones to compel them. Make it illegal for them to strike. I'm already fearful that this £6 billion is just going to get swallowed up in a sinkhole of NHS waste. Questionable pay structures, like the fact that a diversity officer can be paid 4 times as much as a life-saving nurse. It could be handed over to Big Pharma, etc., etc., etc. We absolutely cannot have GPs on strike as well. Make it illegal. Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be unfortunate, you know, if this strike was to go ahead. I mean, obviously, they have a right to do it currently.
Yeah, absolutely.
The police and you know, the army, for example,
yes.
can't strike. But I think it's a long-standing thing. I'm not as critical of healthcare workers maybe as you are, and I know you're not critical of the individual people. You're just critical of sort of this, how the system is at the moment. I think, you know, they are exasperated at the government. The government has a long record of trying to force GPs and junior doctors to sort of take on, whether it was extra workloads, like the 7-day NHS, which led to the strikes we saw in 2016, which were the biggest strikes in NHS history. That's not where I want us to get. So I think, you know, the government does very much need to listen to what GPs are saying and what doctors are saying, because they do know best. And I don't think that the overwhelming majority of people working in the NHS have any sort of bad intentions or lazy at all. No, not at all. I do think one thing that I was quite surprised at as well, get in touch, by the way, do you agree with me, do you disagree with me, gbviews at gbnews.uk, but one thing I was really surprised about is the fact that our NHS has essentially been operating in the dark ages for a very long time. So, you know, when it comes to things like your notes, how often do you find it when they might not catch up with you or a relative if they move wards, let alone if they move hospitals, for goodness sake? Well, actually, a lot of the time, that's because, turns out, they're still using an old paper system. And also our computer system that's in there is pretty outdated as well. So we are having to pump billions of pounds into that. And one question that I would have is, yeah, OK, we did see things like the odd supply shortage when the pandemic was kicking off, and that happened. But those private sector companies pretty much sorted that very, very quickly because they were able to go and do that. Whereas it did seem to me like our public service, i.e. the NHS, has been very slow to react to not just things like the pandemic, but also the modern world. Yeah, absolutely. I think that modernisation is going to be essential if we want to see improvements. But let us know what you think, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll be coming to those throughout the show. But moving on to our top story of the day, the husband of the detained British Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is beginning a hunger strike outside Whitehall today to demand the government does more to help free his wife and bring her home. Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been held in Iran for 5 years on spying charges after travelling to the country to visit her family, charges she has always denied. Yes, well, her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, believes she has been imprisoned as leverage for a £400 million debt that the UK allegedly owes Iran from a tank deal in the 1970s. This is actually his second hunger strike after he staged a 15-day hunger strike outside the Iranian embassy in 2019. Well, let's talk to Richard Ratcliffe now, who is outside the Foreign Office in central London. I think it's worthwhile asking initially, Richard, are you OK?
Yeah, good morning. A bit chilly. You can see me wearing a hat and lots of coats. But yeah, I'm OK.
All right, well, look, I mean, I'm pretty sure we can guess, but just outline to our viewers what exactly it is you want. Why are you out there right now on hunger strike?
Yeah, so I'm on hunger strike in front of the Foreign Office. This is day 2, and the reason for that is because of the jeopardy that Nazanin's in. We had last weekend, she was given a new sentence. She's going to be put back in prison anytime soon. I spoke to the new Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and asked her what consequences there would be for Iran for adding this new sentence on to the first one. And she said she was very angry, but he wasn't going to do anything until Nazanin was put back into prison, which for me is too late. So the things that I've been talking about with the government behind closed doors were 4 things, which are the demands that we put on the hunger strike. One is to acknowledge that Nazanin's a hostage. She's not just being in prison because of anything that she's done, and she's being held as leverage. The second is that the UK needs to start challenging the perpetrators, punishing the perpetrators, which means things like sanctions for those involved, and things like taking Iran to court, international courts. Thirdly, the reason why Iran's doing it is this debt dispute. They need to settle that. It's not just Nazanin, there are a number of others who are being held, and I don't think it makes British citizens safer to have these angry guys and just keep winding them up by not giving them their money back. And fourthly, Nazanin is held alongside a number of other people. Iran does this to a great extent. The reason it does it is because it's looking for leverage with other countries in lots of ways. There are these big nuclear negotiations going on. They need to make an end to hostage-taking, a commitment that all parties make as part of those negotiations. So those are the 4 demands, and we'll see how the government responds.
You mentioned there you spoke to the new Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss. There's been a quick succession over the last few years of Foreign Secretaries. There was Boris Johnson, there was Jeremy Hunt, Dominic Raab, obviously outgoing, and now Liz Truss. Do you feel like that has meant that this issue hasn't been given the due attention it needs? It hasn't been given that concerted effort? And do you have any faith in Liz Truss to do anything differently to any of the previous Foreign Secretaries?
So I think we've had lots of attention, and many people will have seen our story in different forms. I think the changeover, and we've had a turnover of 5 foreign secretaries. What it means is that the strategy keeps changing and chopping, and we've had the things that Boris Johnson promised disappeared when Jeremy Hunt became Foreign Secretary. Things that Jeremy Hunt promised disappeared when Dominic Raab became Foreign Secretary. Things that Dominic Raab promised have now disappeared that Liz Truss has become. There's a reset each time. Where Whitehall sort of establishes this is how it's going to be, and it takes a while for a new minister to get their bearings and to decide what they're willing to do. We've been held in the waiting room for a long time, and it does feel to me that actually the government's approach, which essentially is just to wait until the Iranians act reasonably, it hasn't worked for 5.5 years. If we went for 5.5 years more, I think we'd get the same results.
Yeah, I think you might be waiting a long time for the Iranian government to act reasonably, as you well know. I suppose maybe one benefit is that, Liz Truss just have a track record of getting deals done. Hopefully this is a deal that she can actually get sorted. Just in terms of Nazanin's condition, how is she? What kind of conditions is she being kept in at the moment? What's the situation?
Yeah, well, so at the moment she's waiting to be summoned to prison. So actually she's not, her material conditions are, she's at home. Stressed, probably, the emotional roller coaster she went on would have been shock followed by anger, followed by sadness. As she processes that it's all going to happen again and it'll be a couple more years. And also probably right now a bit of worry. I'm out here on the streets. It's only day 2, so it's not too far, but it is a bit precarious. And she'll worry as to how long this goes on for.
Well, Richard Ratcliffe, we really appreciate your time this morning, and of course we wish you all the best in getting the government to do something to do more, and of course we wish Nazanin all the best as well. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, well, look, a leading NHS doctor has said that maternity services may soon be unable to deliver the care it needs to if the rise in COVID cases continues. We'll be talking to a midwife of 40 years after a quick break. Morning, everyone. Now, the NHS is very much back in the spotlight this morning as the government say they will provide an extra £5.9 billion to help tackle the backlogs across England as part of the Chancellor's upcoming budget. Well, also today, a leading NHS doctor has said that maternity services may soon be unable to deliver the care it needs to if the rise in COVID cases continues.
Yes, the UK's most senior gynaecologist, Dr Edward Morris, is the latest high-profile clinician to go public about increasing pressures on the health service as it faces a backlog of 5.7 million patients as a result of the pandemic. Senior doctors say operations in some parts of the country are already being cancelled, while Carolyn Flint, a midwife with over 40 years of experience, joins us live. Good morning. Thank you for joining us again. This is going to be quite concerning to particularly expectant mothers who might now be thinking they won't get the care that they deserve.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think you shouldn't muddle up the waiting lists with women having babies. Women having babies just have babies. They don't have a waiting list. They just get on and have babies. But the maternity services have been in crisis for really quite a long time now, and nobody seems to have listened. We have more qualified midwives in the United Kingdom than in any other country in the world. But many of them are not practicing as midwives because it is almost impossible to practice as a midwife in the NHS. What's happened is that the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists has flooded the maternity services with obstetricians. Now, you need obstetricians, no question about it, but when you have too many, it queers the pitch.
But
it
is that the fault? Sorry to interrupt, but whose fault's that then? Because that doesn't sound like a government problem. That sounds like something that's taking place within the NHS.
Well, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists is the cleverest and most brilliant trades union I've ever known, and it has flooded the maternity services with obstetricians. Now, what obstetricians do is they interfere. Now, that's fine because sometimes you need them to interfere, but because there are so many at the moment, they're interfering all the time. So there's hardly any woman who manages to get through labour without some sort of intervention, which is mad.
Yeah.
We're mammals. Mammals are really, really good at giving birth. We don't need to be started off or hurried up or, if you think about it, women having first babies have a 50% caesarean section rate. Can
I just put something to you, which is another big NHS story that is coming out, which I fear might not make the problem you're talking about any better, which is the fact that the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is now very strongly considering forcing NHS staff to be double jabbed. Now, in England, apparently 106,000 NHS staff still haven't been vaccinated. This is about 7% of the total. Is this really the right move to be making by Sajid Javid when we know, if anything, that the NHS is suffering from understaffing?
I don't have an opinion on that. I mean, forcing people to have vaccinations is ridiculous, but, vaccinations are really important at the moment. So I can sympathise with his impatience because people who are not vaccinated working in the health service are putting the patients at risk.
I just wonder if it could be another example of our never-ending focus on the one issue of coronavirus actually potentially putting more lives at risk. Because let's just say that this, in the most extreme example, where this 7% decide that actually they're not going to get the jab, and Sajid Javid goes, well, you can't work in our NHS then, well, then people potentially die. So in order to try to protect them from the coronavirus, these people then won't be able to get into work. I just wondered your view on that. Is that a bit self-defeating?
I don't have a view on that. I think it's irrelevant. 7% is neither here nor there when you have a lack of midwives of about 40%. I mean, that is really important. The way women give birth is fundamental to the health of the nation. When you have healthy mothers, healthy babies, That is the
All right.
cornerstone.
Just quickly then, just quickly, sorry, because we get a bit pressed for time. Just to return to that major issue for you then, of the maternity wards. If now, as we see the budget is about to be announced, and we hear calls now from, I suppose it would be the midwives' units or whatever, for more money. Actually, in your opinion, it's more of a structural issue, is it? They don't need more money, they need to operate better, is that right?
Well, of course they need more money because it's been underfunded for millions of years. But yes, it structurally it needs changing. You see, Patrick, you were saying earlier about the IT.
Yes.
The NHS computers in Scotland do not talk to the NHS computers in England.
Naturally.
And the other thing is, if you think about it, asylum seekers, we have a lot of asylum seekers in the UK. We make them destitute. They only have £35 a week. A lot of them will be doctors, midwives and nurses. Why aren't we letting them work? Because we don't let asylum seekers work. Are you with me? It makes
absolutely. We do have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thanks for your time, Carolyn Flint there, midwife with decades of experience in the NHS.
Yes, indeed. We are going to have a quick dip into that inbox now. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Lots to get stuck into this morning. Of course, I was talking about my desire to make it illegal for GPs to go on strike. We also spoke about the fact the NHS is probably going to get around £6 billion worth of additional funding. Midwives issue as well, and of course Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband on hunger strike at the moment as well. How are non-jabbed NHS staff putting patients at risk when double-jabbed people can spread the virus too? That's from Alan. I suppose they would say, well, it maybe lessens the effect of it, but yes. Our GP practice used to do telephone conversations before COVID. They were so popular that patients could get face-to-face earlier, and disabled and find telephone consultations far better. So that's Joy getting in touch there to essentially say that for her at least, face-to-face appointments aren't the be-all or end-all, and you know that's the case for some people.
Yeah, they do work for some people. Well, keep all your thoughts coming into us on our email, of course, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll be back with more on today's top stories and plenty of your views after this. Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We're here all the way through until midday with a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussion on the issues. And make sure you get in touch with us on gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be reading those out throughout the show, but first, it's time for the news.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 10 o'clock. £5.9 billion will be made available in the upcoming budget to help tackle NHS backlogs across England. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is set to announce that £2.3 billion of that will be used to fund community diagnostic centres. They'll be used for tests and scans to try to get waiting lists down. £1.5 billion is also earmarked for increased bed capacity and new surgical hubs. Former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell has told GB News he welcomes the funding, but he says it's not enough to alleviate the pressures on the NHS.
Welcome the fact there's more money going into the health service this week. But again, more money won't help us. A&E departments are overburdened by, again, avoidable pressures related to COVID and actually other respiratory diseases.
Meanwhile, the Health Secretary says the government is heading towards legislating for mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. Employment lawyer Gillian Howard told GB News if double vaccination is enforced, medical exemptions are unlikely. But she says they could receive compensation if dismissed.
For NHS workers, it is unlikely there'll be any medical exemptions at all, and anyone who refuses to be double jabbed or who themselves can't be vaccinated because they themselves are medically compromised will either have to be paid on paid suspension or redeployed if there is any redeployment, or probably fairly dismissed.
Insulate Britain has restarted its road-blocking protest this morning, despite the risk of members being jailed or fined. The environmental group is targeting Canary Wharf, reportedly obstructing the Limehouse Causeway. Another group of protesters has targeted Liverpool Street. Injunctions have already been imposed on some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson for the group says they'll continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. The ultra-low emission zone is expanding in London from today, now covering a quarter of the capital. Drivers of older petrol or diesel cars will have to pay £1.50 a day to drive into the zone. The Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, says the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution. Our reporter Alice Porter spoke to one man who says the ULEZ will damage his business.
The actual £12.50 daily was quite a shock. It's £60 a week extra for me to go to work. What with rising fuel costs and everything else, it's pretty much an extra tank of fuel a week. I got a little bit of an uplift with this contract, and that's now been completely taken away by the extra charge. It's been tough times for everyone through COVID, and being self-employed and trying to keep working has been quite tough as well. So I'm at the point where I don't think I can, at this moment, afford the extra cost of buying a new vehicle to suit the emissions.
The husband of detained British Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe has gone on hunger strike for the second time in 2 years. Richard Ratcliffe is sleeping in a tent outside the Foreign Office in London after his wife lost her latest appeal for freedom. Ms Zaghari Ratcliffe has been held in jail in Iran since 2016, accused of plotting to topple the government. The Foreign Office says they're doing all they can to get Nazanin home. Friends actor James Michael Tyler has died aged 59 after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. The actor, who played coffee shop manager Gunther, revealed in June the disease had spread to his bones. The actor's representative says he died at his home in Los Angeles. And the website of Britain's biggest supermarket, Tesco, is back up and running after a suspected hacking. The outage left customers unable to shop or track their orders over the weekend. The supermarket giant said it was an attempt to interfere with its systems, but says there's no reason to believe its customer data has been affected. Shoppers may have to enter a virtual waiting room before accessing the site to manage traffic flow. You're right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now it's back to the point.
Good morning again. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussion on the issues you care about. So here's what's on the menu today.
Yes, as we continue to look ahead to the budget and ask, will it be Rishi to the rescue? Nearly £6 billion has been tipped to be funnelled into the National Health Service to alleviate spiralling waiting lists.
Yes, and the controversial police, crime and sentencing bill is making its way through the laws. The bill sparked widespread unrest during the summer amid claims it cracks down too harshly on freedom of expression and freedom to protest, leading to accusations of authoritarianism being levelled at the government. We'll speak about this very shortly.
Yes, indeed. Now, we have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. But first, Mercy gives her views on the latest trans row.
The charity Oxfam has removed a children's game celebrating inspirational women from its shops because transgender and non-binary staff complained that it did not, quote, respect people of all genders. The game is supposed to familiarise children with the great women of past and present and their achievements in a fun bingo format. Women who feature in the game include the likes of Marie Curie, the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only woman to win it twice, Amelia Earhart, the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, Malala Yousafzai, who was literally shot in the face for speaking out against the Taliban denying girls the right to an education, and in 2014 became the youngest person to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And Rosa Parks, who was honoured by the United States Congress as the first lady of civil rights after she led the movement which resulted in racially segregated buses in America being outlawed. These were all undeniably great women, achieving incredible feats as women, often against the odds. Many were doing so in a time or place where people thought women were not worth as much as men. These were not birthing people, not cervix owners, not chest feeders. They were and are women. And in justifying this frankly unjustifiable decision, Oxfam has issued a spineless statement which says this: "We took the decision to remove the game from sale following concerns raised by trans and non-binary colleagues who told us that it didn't live up to our commitment to respect people of all genders." Oxfam, what about showing respect to the dozens of women in this collection who have positively impacted millions, possibly even billions collectively, of lives throughout history? Lives of both men and women, by the way. What about your commitment to the countless number of women who kindly fundraise and donate to your causes, who want nothing to do with the self-indulgent dictates of the gender wars and who just want you to get on with your job of carrying out charitable works? Oxfam can't even bring itself to give a single substantive reason why featuring these women might cause offence. In fact, we know that the only offence these women have committed is being born a woman. Oxfam ought to take a leaf out of the book of these great women. Lead with conviction, stand up for what's right, find a meaningful, worthwhile hill to die on. Because taking issue with some of history's most incredible women is certainly not it.
Yes, well, Oxfam don't exactly have a long track record of standing up for women, do
No,
they?
not at all. And I believe even just this year, a couple of its staff have been suspended pending investigations around some, sexual abuse whilst on the ground, basically working in foreign countries. We all know, of course, of that report from a couple of years ago, which found that investigation, which found there were lots of, instances of sexual abuse of young girls in some cases. So yes, generally speaking, they don't. But I just think it's a very odd hill to die on, this, isn't it? You've got this...
Pointless.
I mean, you've got, a fun game, teaching young kids, teaching young girls about all these inspirational women across history who've done incredible things. I just named a few there. There's a few dozen in that games pack. And the idea that, probably just a handful of non-binary or trans people have said... We don't actually know what they've said because Oxfam won't tell us, but they've said it's not respecting non-binary people or people of all genders, and then they've made the decision to pull it from all of its stores. I just find that incredibly bizarre.
But I don't understand what they really want to do about that, because you can't just manufacture a board game celebrating non-binary people from the 1800s, because with respect, they didn't tend to really be there, did they? And so, at the expense of actually allowing people to learn about some of the greatest women to have ever walked the face of the earth, now they're basically going, well, actually, we'll just have to cancel that.
Yeah, and look, I think I have no issue with the concept of somebody being a transgender person, you know, of course they deserve rights and of course they deserve respect. They're a person, we live in a civil society. I'm all okay with that. But where I draw the line is when any of that infringes on rights of women, and often that's what we're seeing. We're not just seeing people, you know, calling for more rights for themselves. They're almost sort of chipping away at the rights of biological women, and it does feel often that the demands of that lobby, you know, those activists, take precedent and prioritise over how women feel and what women think should be right, which includes things like not allowing, you know, trans people perhaps in women's spaces. I think that's a legitimate thing for a woman.
Well, especially if that place happens to be a prison cell or a hospital.
Yeah, exactly, and that's my issue. But completely ridiculous hill to die on. And I suspect many people, if Oxfam continue to do this kind of thing, will start pulling their donations.
Yeah, well, this rubbish has to stop, and that's according to Kenneth. And Mark has been in touch as well, saying it's misogyny. You know, so here you've got some men actually sticking up for women's rights, essentially. But I do find the whole thing baffling that it's probably, look, someone who was born a man who now wishes to be a woman, who's trying to dictate what womanhood is, quite possibly having a game that they don't like banned by a board group full of other men. I just think it's just a bit on the nose, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It does feel very, you know, intuitive, you know, and counterproductive as well for all of that to be happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Yes, just a couple of them that relate to what we're going to be talking about right now, really, which is that a lot of people saying that they agree that it should be illegal for GPs to go on strike. That was my kind of rallying call at the start of the show. What are your views on that? Should it be illegal for GPs to now go on strike? Doreen certainly thinks that they should. So look, stay in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's have that chat. Now, it's in relation, of course, to nearly £6 billion worth of funding. It's set to be announced on Wednesday for our beloved National Health Service. Now, the money will be used to help clear the record backlog of people waiting for tests and scans, which has been worsened by the pandemic. It stands at more than 5 million people now on those waiting lists, and the Chancellor has called this amount of money anyway, game-changing.
Yes, well, let's talk now to Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, who joins us now this morning to talk about this announcement. Thank you for joining us. All I ever hear, or all I ever seem to hear, is throw more money at the NHS, more money, and there's never really anything about restructuring and reforming the NHS. Do you welcome this, or would you have preferred to see actually something about substantively changing the NHS?
Well, Mercy, it seems churlish to complain, doesn't it? But I think you're right. I think throwing more money at a system that is failing is guaranteed not to work. I can pick out some of the elements of this that disappoint me. They're talking about new diagnostic centres. Well, we saw that in the Blair government opened Darcy centres. You may remember that, which opened up very expensively and then closed down because they were just duplicating work elsewhere. There's not much point doing a lot of scans if you don't then have the staff to follow up and do any necessary surgery. And I'm afraid the NHS is so complex. It's a bit like whack-a-mole. And the problem here is, yes, you do more scans, you diagnose more illness, but we're short of staff. And the staff shortages are not just a money problem. They're a real problem. They're a training problem, a deployment problem. And that's not going to be solved. I know they're talking about opening surgical centres. They're also talking about more money thrown at the IT systems. And we know what's happened in the past with money wasted on poor IT systems in the NHS. So, look, I welcome this. I did read today that the UK has the second highest world percentage of GDP spent on healthcare, second only to the USA, which, as we know, is very expensive. So, our system is failing not because there's a lack of money, but because, as you say, it needs restructuring. But it needs a fundamental restructure, not fiddling around the edges. It needs restructuring from top to bottom, which is unlikely to happen in the near future, I'm afraid.
No, that kind of root and branch reform just isn't, and especially in our current political system as well, where essentially politicians just try to cling on for a few years until the next general election, and it's almost like rearranging the decking on the Titanic sometimes, isn't it, I think? But look, do we have to face facts here? Are we actually just witnessing the slow death of the NHS? We're spending about as much money as we possibly can on it. The IT issues are there and will require a lot of change. The staffing issues are a problem, massive problem that seems to go quite deep. It does appear to me as though we have GPs who, well, they are relatively willing to go on strike. I mean, this is a potent cocktail of disaster, isn't it?
Yes, Patrick, but you talk about slow death. I've been witnessing this slow death for 30 years now. This isn't new. It's been gradual. You and I will know, before the pandemic, it could take 2 or 3 weeks to see a GP. There were waiting lists at hospitals, operations cancelled at the last minute, annual winter flu crises, and all before the pandemic. So this is not new. This has all been building up gradually. And as you say, the politicians know they daren't tamper with the NHS. And my answer to that is, well, then it's not the politicians' fault, it's the voters' fault. Because if we wouldn't vote for a party that said, hey, I'm going to bring in an insurance-based system like Germany or like Australia, with a safety net for people that can't afford or don't have insurance, if we won't vote for that, then it's the public's fault. And in a sense, the public have chosen this system because they prefer it to anything that they fear might replicate the American system, which is always the demon that's thrown at us. If we don't have an NHS, we'll be paying thousands of dollars like they do in the US. Well, those are not the two alternatives. There are very good insurance-based systems all over Europe and other parts of the world, and we should now be talking about that, sensibly talking about that.
Just want to get you quickly on something that I was speaking a bit about earlier on, which is about whether or not it should be made illegal for GPs to strike. I know that can seem like quite a draconian take. I can understand if people do disagree with me about that. Where are you at on it?
Totally in agreement with you, Patrick, and I would extend it to all doctors. I didn't support the junior doctors' strike of a couple of years ago. I think, like the police, I think it should be part of our qualification that you give up the right to withdraw labour, because I think it's a fundamental abrogation of the Hippocratic Oath. Doctors should not withdraw labour in order to achieve either a personal financial gain or other political gain. I totally agree, Patrick.
Yeah, there you go. I like it when that happens. Thank you very much. Dr. Lawrence Gillis, you can come back. There we go. Well, look, obviously this is the announcement that we are expecting around a £6 billion injection into our NHS. See what I did there? We're going to go over to your views now. They are well paid and spoilt, according to Linda. He says that some GPs are milking this for all it's worth. Look, it's worth noting as well, this is certainly not as black and white as all,
I don't think we should assume all, not...
Why do you take your point?
People in the NHS. I mean, I've been quite shocked to learn how low some of their salaries are. We're talking some, nurses, some doctors as well. So we shouldn't assume everybody's on this sort of six-figure salary.
No,
every single doctor. And it is an incredibly difficult job, which takes rightly a very long time to train for. And clearly, you have to be very committed to that profession to put yourself through that. So I do sympathise with GPs, but the doctors being able to strike, I think is definitely a conversation worth having.
Yes, 100%. And I think as long as the system exists where, you can have a diversity officer on about 4 times as much as a life-saving nurse, then you've probably got a little bit of a problem there, I would have thought. But, yes, lots of you also just getting in touch about Mercy's monologue there on Oxfam's decision to essentially ban a board game because it doesn't seem... Well, because it's just celebrating women who've achieved greatness over the course of their lives. Lots of you just basically saying you think this is madness and it's going too far.
Yes, well, after the break, Insulate Britain are once again disrupting our roads. We'll be bringing you the details of that shortly, sadly, but that's after the weather. Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking to be a mix of sunny spells and scattered, locally heavy blustery showers. Let's take a look at the details here. It will be a mild start to the day in the southwest, a dry and sunny start for many, but showers will be already blowing in on a brisk wind. In contrast, it will be a dry and bright start in the southeast, with plenty of early sunshine on offer, although breezy here too. Also a rather windy start in South Wales, and there'll be sunny spells and scattered locally heavy showers. However, it will also be mild. It will be a drier start for the Midlands on this Monday morning, with plenty of sunshine for all areas. from the off. As with other areas, it will feel rather mild too. The northeast will also have a mild start to the day. It'll be mostly dry with sunny spells, but there will also be a few sharp showers making it across the Pennines. Showers will be most frequent across Scotland, especially in the west. They'll be heavy with hail and thunder possible as well. It'll be windy with coastal gales possible in the west. It'll be windy to start for Northern Ireland too, although mostly day at first with sunny spells for many. The odd shower is possible, mainly in the west, and showers will spread eastwards through the afternoon, reaching most areas of the UK, remaining rather windy but mild. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day. Now, Insulate Britain are back causing disruptions on the roads today after a 10-day break. The climate group say they have blocked 3 locations across the City of London. Well, let's talk to our home and security editor, Mark White, who joins us now in the studio. They're back at it again, very annoying to the vast majority of us. What do they want this time?
Can almost feel the blood pressure rising in our viewers. It's one of these issues that absolutely gets them exercised, understandably. And yeah, they're back out, 10-day hiatus we were treated to, but they have decided that they are not buying the government's heat and building strategy, and that it doesn't go far enough for them, and they want to instigate more direct action. So that's why we've seen them out again on the street today, some 3 locations, and it looks like they're targeting the city, targeting business, because we've got some of the protesters out there at Bishopsgate in the heart of the city, also Upper Thames Street, which is just near Southwark Bridge, for anyone that knows central London. That's the sort of locations you're looking at now. And then another location out by Canary Wharf. So designed, obviously, to cause maximum disruption to traffic in areas of London, which are always pretty busy anyway. You can see the police are on scene here, but buses queuing up. We go through the same routine, I'm afraid, with the police, which is they have to wait for enough resources to come to the scene before they start moving in and making arrests. That takes a while, and all the time the traffic jams build up, and these people are determined that they are not going to move until they're forcibly removed, either by the police or indeed members of the public.
I'm sure those images of some of them laughing and joking with police officers will do the public the world.
And Mark, I was sure there was an injunction issued against them. I mean, many people will be saying, well, are they actually legally allowed to do this? What happened with that injunction?
Well, they're not legally allowed to do it anyway because they're breaking the law. It is a criminal offence under the Road Traffic Act, but not subject to massive penalties at the end of the day. That's why the government wanted to introduce injunctions, so that if they broke these injunctions banning them for protesting at key locations, there would potentially be a more severe retribution for them, which could include potentially a jail term of up to 2 years. Now, that injunction is in place at the M25 orbital motorway around London, other key locations in the city, these sort of main arterial routes around central London and in East London as well. But because the injunction is a civil matter that has been brought by National Highways, it needs to work its way through the court. I was at the Royal Courts of Justice last Tuesday where they were discussing this, and they said they were expecting a trial to take place involving 124 of these activists. Not sure whether they will all be in the dock together. Clearly they won't. Whether they will be represented or whether they will be dealt with in batches of 10 or 20 at a time. We don't know that, but they're expecting that this court case will begin at the end of November. But there's an awful lot of days between now and the end of November. This is their 14th direct action day that they have launched, and they are saying they're going to continue that. So expect many more before they actually finally face that High Court judge in whatever action he determines to hand down.
Mark, thank you very much. All right, there are Home Affairs and Security Editor just discussing the latest Insulate Britain action, which is unfolding at 3 locations around the capital, as far as we're aware. Now, moving away from that, Chancellor Rishi Sunak will unveil the government's tax and spending plans in just 2 days. Now, Wednesday's budget will set out how much money government departments may get over the next 3 years. As the Chancellor prepares to deliver his budget, we look ahead to what it might mean for the devolved regions of the UK and their ability to tackle the problems within them.
That's why GBNews' Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie is with us now from Belfast. Good morning, Doogie. How is the budget going to affect Northern Ireland? How is it expected to affect Northern Ireland?
Well, good morning to Stormont. I'm standing here in front of the devolved government, and like its counterparts in Scotland and Wales, it has a direct input to the budget but no direct decisions. So it will be sitting waiting, wanting to see what financial slice of the pie that they are going to get and how they will put it out to the departments that need that very important cash. Now, I have been around the country in the last week or two looking at inflationary pressures on raw materials, especially in farming. And it has amazed me how much the private sector are now singing off the same hymn sheet as the public sector. And yesterday I spoke to an economist and an MP. The devolved institutions of the UK are very much spectators when the Chancellor takes the dispatch box to deliver his budget. This COVID year may well be more about the spending reviews than tax receipts.
We've already had 2 significant budgets, as it were, already this year. We had back in March, we had the biggest tax-raising budget since Norman Lamont in 1993. And then last month, we then had the announcement that there was going to be big increases in national insurance contributions, both for employees and employers, but that only takes effect in April next year. And so we then have this budget on the 27th of October, which is then a spending review and a budget. And probably many of the big tax announcements have already been made. So the focus is maybe going to be on the spending front with the spending review. And for devolved regions such as Northern Ireland, the big question that the Finance Minister Conor Murphy will be looking for is how much is the additional amount of money going to be for Northern Ireland.
It's unlikely that duties on goods like alcohol and fuel will rise, as the rising prices are already pushing up inflation.
Consumers and households and businesses are going through this surge in inflationary pressures of input costs, and that's coming at a time for households after those people who were on the temporary universal tax credit, £20 a week top up. They've seen their income fall. They're now seeing their cost rise, and then they've got further tax rises to come in April next year. So any sort of changes on things, whether it's alcohol or cigarette duties or things like that, are probably going to be not foremost in the minds of households at the minute as they're grappling with the cost of living crisis.
All areas of the UK have some flexibility as to how they spend their block grant.
We're dependent upon what happens at Westminster for most of the money we have to spend here in Northern Ireland. We have very few revenue-raising powers. So what happens next Wednesday will be very, very important for Northern Ireland, because basically it will give us the basis from which we will be able to decide what choices we make for our own economy.
Stormont needs to find savings in the public sector in order to grow its economy.
You know, you look at what we have in Northern Ireland, a surplus of civil servants. I mean, we've got a far, far bigger public sector. And one of the things I think the finance minister should be doing in Northern Ireland, the president is saying, find us efficiencies in your department, rather than simply saying we need more money for wages, we need more money for new recruits or whatever, so that the money can actually go into spending which will be in the benefit to the economy in the long run, increase productivity, increase jobs, increase our competitiveness. That's where the money should be spent. But unfortunately, once it comes from Westminster, there isn't that degree of control.
The workforce has been badly hit after the pandemic, and skills training is high on the Chancellor's list.
If you want to increase skills, you're looking at the medium term rather than the short term. And the question is, in the short term, what do you do? Do you relieve some of the immigration rules to allow people in? The danger, of course, if you do that, it becomes permanent and retrains local people. And they just go for cheap foreign labour. And I suppose those are the kind of difficult questions that the Chancellor has to look at in the budget this year. My view is that if you're wanting to have a skilled economy, then you have to start it now, and you have to start putting the incentives and the investment into it now. And that should be one of the key points in the budget.
Other areas still with problems are aviation and travel. And many here will look for the budget to be a smooth landing for a hard-hit economy. Well, of course, the code words there are spending review, and that, of course, is translated as we are going to mark your homework regions. We want to see where you're spending the block grant and where we can save money. The private sector are looking for other things, such as a freeze on the cut that's already there in VAT for the hospitality sector. The aviation sector all through the world needs help, and maybe some sort of furlough scheme still being kept in place to keep those skilled workers there.
Well, Doogie, thanks for bringing us that report. Of course, we'll await until Wednesday to see exactly how the Chancellor's budget will be affecting the regions of the UK.
Indeed, yes. We're going to go to some of your views now. GB Views at gbnews.uk. And Mark White earlier on just brought us the latest when it came to Insulate Britain. They're back at it at 3 different locations around the capital. This is Jill saying that she wants the government to do more, that there should have been more to be put into law to stop them from doing this. John says they should get a week in prison for each protest that they take part in, and if they reoffend when they're released, it should be a month per protest.
Yeah. I'm not sure that would stop them, to be honest. I think some of them are very determined to sacrifice a lot, really, to carry out this protest because they believe in their cause that much.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Linda's been in touch about the potential GP strike and whether or not it should be illegal. So they cost the taxpayers a huge amount to train, this is doctors. Therefore, they should have a duty to repay taxpayers by not striking.
Well, technically, everybody who goes to uni costs the taxpayer a huge amount as well, technically, because the government does pay upfront everybody's student fees, and most of that does not get paid back. So,
no.
Argument for most people to do that as well.
OK, well, look, moving away now. The ultra-low emissions zone in London is expanding from today. We'll let you know if you'll have to pay more to drive in the capital after this short news bulletin. I'm
Amelia Harper. Here are the latest headlines. £5.9 billion will be made available in the upcoming budget to help tackle NHS backlogs across England. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is set to announce that £2.3 billion of the funding will be used to try to get waiting lists down. £1.5 billion is earmarked for increased bed capacity and new surgical hubs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. Elsewhere, Insulate Britain has restarted its road-blocking protest this morning. That's despite the risk of members being jailed or fined. The environmental group is targeting Canary Wharf, obstructing the Limehouse Causeway. Another group of protesters has targeted Liverpool Street. Injunctions have already been imposed on some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson says they will continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. And the website of Britain's biggest supermarket, Tesco, is back up and running after a suspected hacking. The outage left customers unable to shop or track their orders over the weekend. The supermarket giant said it was an attempt to interfere with its systems, but says there's no reason to believe customer data has been affected. Shoppers may have to enter a virtual waiting room before accessing the site to manage traffic flow. I'll have more on today's main stories for you in half an hour.
Yes, now the ultra-low emission zone is expanding in London from today, and it will now cover a quarter of the capital. If you have an older petrol or diesel car, you will have to pay £12.50 a day to drive it into the zone. The Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, says the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution and hopes that people will sell their older cars for greener vehicles.
Yes, but critics say most of the money for the scrappage schemes has gone, and over half of motorists in London recently surveyed said they didn't know anything about the expansion. Now, while some have condemned this expansion, others have welcomed it. Our London reporter Alice Porter is in Stratford this morning and joins us now live there. Alice, what's it like down there and what's going on where you are?
Good morning. Yes, I'm at the launch at the Olympic Stadium here, which of course has a lot of memories for people in London, because of course today is a very significant day. It is the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone, which means a quarter of people living in London will be in the zone, and if your car is not compliant with the regulations, then you will have to pay £12.50 a day to bring it in. We've got the Mayor for London just behind me, and lots of different buses and different transport that have been adapted to keep with these new regulations. But one person who joins me now is Rosamond Adu-Kissy-Deborah, who joins me now. Can you just tell me a little bit about how significant this day is for you personally?
Yes, it's an incredibly emotional day. It will be 11 years almost to the day that my late daughter first became ill. And the reason why this is significant, this got brought up a lot in court, and all the experts agreed, so independent experts, that this is the way forward in future when it comes to young people and young people's health.
Now, for anyone who's watching who doesn't know the story, Ella, Rosamond's daughter, was 9 years old and died, and is the first person in the UK to have had on her death certificate that pollution was a leading factor in her death. So many years later now, do you think things are changing at all?
They are changing, but they're changing slowly. We've now got COVID, which is linked to, again, high air pollution. Still, children continue to die in London, which is a huge worry. I was at Great Ormond Street yesterday, and I saw very, very, very ill children who are breathing unsafe air. So my thoughts are, again, with them for today. But this should hopefully make things better for quite a significant amount of children.
Because from what I can remember, Ella was sort of walking to school along the sort of South Circular Road near Lewisham, an area which would now be covered by the ultra-low emission zone. What sort of difference could that have made to her health and other children who have asthma and similar conditions?
Yeah, we have a very high asthma rate in London. Ella would have lived if all these initiatives have been in, and that takes a lot of getting used to. But look, I have to think about other children and what I can do to help them. Look, this isn't the be-all and end-all of everything. ULEZ alone isn't going to sort it. We need to walk more, cycle more. There are so many more things that need to be done, but this is a step in the right. We are heading where we should be, and we're going to COP26 next week. So this is a positive day. I think someone said to me, you're not jumping for joy, and I said it's really difficult when you've lost a child and it's so close to a major anniversary but I feel really positive and hopeful that the Mayor of London did read the coroner's reports and is acting accordingly, and this will ultimately save lives. And I know for poorer Londoners, I will continue to ask again for the government to introduce a diesel scrappage scheme. I spoke to the Mayor's team. They have got a scrappage scheme, but I don't know how many people that covers. But ultimately, people say the same thing to me all the time. They were encouraged to buy diesel, and now we know how poisonous diesel is. People want to get out of their diesels, and therefore, a bit like the heat pumps, we ask the Chancellor again, as the budget is coming up, if we could kindly look at the motorists and give them some grants towards buying newer and cleaner cars.
Yeah, absolutely, because of course some people who bought diesel cars with very good intentions only as near as 6 years ago are now being found that they're not compliant for roads in London, which of course is very frustrating for them.
It's incredibly frustrating, but I think I'm coming on the side of people's health. We know that air pollution is linked to so many things like cancer, strokes, and whenever there's a spike in air pollution, there's cardiac arrest and asthma attacks. So I'm really coming from a health point of view. But I do understand, especially with COVID as well, businesses, and I bear that in mind. I'm not coming to this blind. But again, that's why we are asking the government to support people who actually want to change. It's not that people are resisting. They just can't afford it, and we have been through a terrible 18 months, and my heart goes out to so many people. So that's why I'm quite subdued for today, because I am thinking about all those people who are struggling as well.
Well, look, thank you so much for speaking to us. I know tomorrow's it's a significant anniversary, because that's the anniversary of the time that Ella really first got ill and you noticed there was a problem. So thank you so much for speaking to us today, because I know this must be for you quite a personal sort of situation.
No, thank you for having me, and I've been in the studio before, and you're very very kind to me, all of you. But yeah, we will think of her tomorrow when she was climbing those steps in Monument. And I said to you how guilty I feel. There's 333 steps. And, you know, back then I thought she just had a cold. And I said, yeah, you can climb it. And as we all know, ultimately what happened to her. But we will definitely be thinking of her for tomorrow. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you for speaking. I'm going to be here at the Olympic Stadium for the rest of the morning, hopefully to speak to Sadiq Khan. This was his initiative that he put into place to expand the ultra-low emission zone. It's been quite a few years in the making, but it starts today. Unfortunately, there was a sort of survey last week that showed over half of Londoners didn't even know that this is coming into an existence today. So if you're watching this and you're unsure, please go on the TfL website, get your car checked out and make sure it's ULEZ compliant.
Well, Alice, thank you for that, and really touching story. It does show you why the other side of the argument. Of course, lots of people will be unhappy that they have to now pay more to drive in the capital, myself included. But it does show you that it does have real life effects, and it can actually kill people who have very severe issues relating to their respiratory health.
Well, absolutely. I mean, whenever I go back up north, one of the first things I notice when I get off the train or indeed climb out of my diesel car is the air quality, the difference in air quality, and that is one of the first things that you really do notice, certainly. And there is just a difference. There is a bit of a toxic bubble over London. I know that there have been concerns about whether or not now is exactly the right time to do this. Is it going to stifle London's economy potentially in any way, shape or form at a time, of course, when we need economic recovery? But I suppose you do hear the other side of it, as you said there, don't you? When it is essentially killing children, really, and we can't really have that, can we?
Yes, exactly. Now, almost 8 in 10 schools said they have been targeted by anti-vaccine protesters in a recent survey by the Association of School and College Leaders. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for councils to enforce exclusion zones to protect school students from anti-vaccination protests and protesters. Sir Keir said it was sickening that protesters were approaching schools and spreading what he called dangerous misinformation about the coronavirus vaccine to students. While earlier on the Great British Breakfast, Kirsty and Simon spoke to Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green, about the harassment school children are facing. Here's what she had to say.
Just feels to us utterly inappropriate that this should be happening at schools. It's really important that parents who want 12 to 15-year-old children vaccinated should be able to get access to those vaccines for their children. And it's really important that where these protests are taking place and causing problems, that the police should be able to act swiftly. And that's why we are saying that for a temporary period, while we're in this COVID situation, we would want to see the law strengthened so that if necessary, and I hope it won't be, the police could apply these sort of buffer zones around schools if needed. So these are about actually being able to prevent activity at school gates. It's not about catching criminals after the event. It's about stopping activity that is causing concern at school gates. And I'm not saying that they will be needed in every case, by no means, but it's important that we have the full range of legal measures to make sure that children can get in and out of school peacefully and safely, and that where there are parents wanting their children to be vaccinated, of course they can have those vaccines. Well, we've heard different reports of the numbers of schools around the country. We don't want it happening at any school, but it's certainly of concern that that this is taking place at school gates. Both causing concern, causing some alarm, but also spreading misinformation. And, schools are the places where we want children to learn the facts and really to be given accurate information. And it's absolutely disgraceful that people are coming to school gates and spreading this misinformation in front of children. But we also think Plan B on its own isn't enough. We need things like the ventilation systems being put into public buildings, including in schools, which still hasn't happened. What we are seeing now is an alarming rise in the spread of infection. Experts saying that they believe Plan B should be implemented because, of course, we don't want to get into a situation where, as we go further into winter, the NHS comes under unmanageable pressure or that we don't, again, have the kind of Christmas that families are looking forward to. So I think it is time to listen to the experts. Again and again, what we've seen with this government is they don't act until too late, and then we have to act much harder. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's learn from our earlier experiences.
Yes, well, there we go. That's interesting one. I'm just interested to see what you guys think about all of this, really, because, look, not everything to do with the vaccines is misinformation, It's just, I suppose, if we only live in a world where you can parrot one particular line all the time, 24/7, and you can't have any conversational discourse about it. Having said that, there is a difference between handing quite fruity leaflets to children at the school gates. Of course, there has to be some kind of happy medium there, really. But
yeah, and I think whilst obviously misinformation, there are some things which are clearly, can be proven to be factually incorrect. Yeah. But there are lots of grey areas, aren't there? Yeah. And there's lots of things that, a few months ago, a year and a half ago, in relation to COVID, were being called conspiracy theories, even questioning whether they would be true. You would call it a conspiracist. And now some of those things are emerging as a reality. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with the idea that something is either a conspiracy theory or is absolutely accepted fact.
And who gets to actually set the tone? And I think as well we've hurtled towards a situation now where you can only really have one view on climate change. You can't really ever come up and say... You have to say that basically you do believe that climate change absolutely 100% exists, and that actually maybe the only disagreement you can have is how we achieve net zero. Now, look, whether or not you personally believe in climate change or whatever, of course, I know that most people do, and that's fine, but I don't necessarily want to live in a world where people can't have different views to it all, or I don't see why we have to as well, if people are being silenced on that. And that's how people are proven wrong is the thing as well. My worry is with this kind of stuff, if you stifle down people who are peddling conspiracy theories, maybe even if they do genuinely believe in them, then actually you can't have that debate and discussion with them. You'll never change their mind. You almost get this kind of...
Yeah, and I think with climate change, yes, it's happening. I think the main debate is the extent to which people... the effect it's going to have in the short term, certainly, because there are people who do catastrophise, in my opinion, and obviously in the other direction there are people who outright deny its existence, which I think can be equally dangerous.
Julie's been in touch about your discussion earlier about Oxfam.
Yeah.
And they've essentially cancelled a board game, really, that celebrates really powerful women and great women in history. I've just cancelled my subscription to Oxfam that I've had for many years and will now seek to put money into an organisation that is not complicit in the erasure of women.
Yeah, and look, that's what people need to do. They need to put their money where their mouth is, because ultimately money hits companies, in the pocket where it hurts. And so if you see a company that is doing something you don't agree with, you're ideologically opposed to, the one thing to do, whether it's a charity or whether it's, a for-profit company, it's to hit them in the pocket.
It does make me laugh. I just saw the latest... We'll move on in a sec, don't worry, I'm getting shouted at. But it did make me laugh, actually. There's Carlsberg's latest advert. Now, Carlsberg used to do great adverts, right, didn't they? About, it was just fantastic stuff. The ones that would really stick in the mind. And then now, at the moment, from what I can gather, there's one of an animated seal swimming around. It says, for every Carlsberg that you buy, we get to plant some seagrass. And I think no man has ever walked up to a bar and gone, what pint do you want, mate? Well... Gosh, I could have anything, I couldn't really, but I know that Carlsberg plants seagrass, so I'm going to go and get a pint of that. I mean, what's the point? Anyway, there we go. Moving away.
Yes, people in Darlington are being told a £3.43 million investment will help transform the town, creating new jobs, regenerating the high street and levelling up the region. Darlington is the first council in the North East and one of the first councils across Britain to secure and receive funding from the government's Towns Fund, which aims to transform town centres. Our North East of England reporter, Rachel Sweeney, has been looking at what this money will be used for and whether it's enough to make real change when it comes to levelling up.
This is the heart of Darlington. It might need a little bit of TLC in places, but where doesn't? It's a successful market town. It has a solid community, loads of potential, and now investment from the government. It's hoped that this money will go towards long-term growth. And to talk to us more about that is Project Manager Chris Mains and Councillor Jonathan Dalston. Chris, we're going to start with you. £1.37 million will go towards Skinnergate and the Yards. Now, for our viewers who don't know where that is or what it means, can you tell us a little bit about it and what will change?
Yep, Skinnergate in the Yards is a conservation area, it's a heritage area in the town, it's a very important high street within the town. It's, as you mentioned before, it needs a little bit tender love and care, and that's what we're going to give it. So we've been doing some work in the Yards already. It's with colourful doors and benches, we've made a difference. Think York Shambles, but on a smaller scale. And that's Darlington, that's what we're aiming for. Each has got its own creative strategy. We've got the strategy of Project Darling in the Yards, and we're building a creative strategy for Skinnergate, which is looking to develop Notting Hill in Darlington, is what we're aiming to do. So it's high ambition, and this is just the start.
They're quite an interesting part of Darlington, aren't they, the Yards? An interesting history.
Yes, it's High Road is obviously what it says it is. It's High Road, where there's grand houses. The yards sit behind High Road, and sometimes I think they've got a less than salubrious past. I think, you know, it needs to be lifted up beyond that. But the buildings are there, it's 17th century and older in parts, so it's got a good history. Yeah.
Well, you're certainly well on the way. Now, Councillor, 1.47 million, a new facility at Darlington College. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What will that mean to people here?
Yeah, so we're really excited because we've been listening to businesses, and now we're in a position to launch this really innovative T-Skills project. And what that's about is getting businesses to work with education providers to build packages that are going to be meaningful, so giving them the skills so they can actually come out with a qualification that's going to absolutely secure them a job and a career for the future.
Important to invest in education, particularly in Darlington.
Absolutely, you know, Darlington is about growth, and you know, we're getting loads of people coming to relocate. We've got the Treasury coming, and that's going to give a confidence to people to come to the North East, come to Darlington to start, you know, setting up their business or relocating their business. So we need to be in a really strong position to have people with the right skills to fill the jobs that people need.
And moving on to £500,000 for Adults Skills Centre. What is a skills centre and who will benefit from that?
Yeah, so we're really proud in Darlington because we've got some fantastic buildings. As part of the Towns Fund, we wanted to protect some of those buildings, and one of the ways we've done it is to secure the Northern Echo building. It's been a long-standing building in our town for a long time. So what we've done is we've bought that, and then we're going to turn it into a skills centre, and that's about giving adults the skills, again, that they need to do the jobs that are coming in the future. But not only just the skills in terms of technical skills, it's about behavioural skills, confidence, mental health, that type of skill.
And we're expecting more people to visit Darlington. Is that why the train station is getting a little bit of a spruce?
Yes, not just because of that, but we're looking at Darlington has got a strong history, and it's the birthplace of the steam passenger railway, celebrating 200 years of that in 2025. And what we're doing, we've got the modern station, which needs a spruce up, that's happening, and we've got the Head of Steam Museum, which has also got a project in line, we're looking towards that. So you've got the heritage, looking towards the modern history of the railway. It is Darlington's proud history, I would say.
Fantastic. And in terms of levelling up, is this enough money to do the job?
It's never enough money to do the job. It's an excellent start, and we're really pleased with what we've got, and we're really pleased to be looking forward to getting more. There's a lot of work to do in Darlington, in the town centre, and up the gateways of Victoria Road in Northgate. There is a lot of deprivation and improvement that's required up there. I think this is the beginning, and what we're trying to do is do it fairly for the people of Darlington. So more would do. Yeah.
And Councillor, we'll end on you. What do you love about Darlington, and what do you hope for the future?
I love its potential. I mean, there's never been a better time to come to Darlington, whether that's to live, whether it's to work, or whether it's to relocate and set up a new business. Darlington is absolutely on the up. Everyone across the country is talking about Darlington, and I think you can see why.
There you go. Everybody across the country is talking about Darlington. Come and visit. We'll see you soon.
Well, there we go. We've given Darlington the hard sell. I think I might be up there very soon myself. Right, so keep all your thoughts coming into us on the emails, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after the weather.
Hello. A bright and breezy day for many of us. There'll be some decent sunny spells, but also quite frequent showers pushing in from the west. Even some thunderstorms around, because these showers will be very lively. Quite an unstable air mass across the UK at the moment, coming from the west behind this weather front. Low pressure to the north of the UK. Tightly packed isobars, so a breezy day to come. The breeze pushing the remaining cloud out of the way from East Anglia and the southeast, but soon enough, showers follow in from the west. Frequent downpours in the west especially, but just about anywhere could catch these showers. And where they do occur, there'll be some gusty winds and even some thunderstorms with some small hail in places. Nevertheless, a mild day to come, 17 or 16 in the south, 10 or 11 further north, and that's where the strongest breeze will be. The showers quickly die away, actually, after the sun goes down in many places, but they'll continue around western shores, perhaps the odd one coming close to the south coast. Then later in the night, the cloud thickens in the west, and it turns wet across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That'll keep temperatures up at 8 or 9 Celsius, dipping to 5 or 6 in the east of England, where at least we do have some sunshine to begin things on Tuesday. And we keep that sunshine for much of the morning, but the cloud thickens elsewhere and spells of rain move across Scotland, northern England, into parts of Wales. Some light and patchy drizzle further south, but actually it does dry up a little into the afternoon, although a lot of places stay cloudy. There'll be further outbreaks of rain in the northwest of Scotland, and it's going to be a mild day with this strong southwesterly breeze reaching gale force around northern and northwestern shores. Further spells of rain into the northwest of Scotland on Tuesday night, a lot of cloud elsewhere. And this wet weather sticks around for a time, I think, through Wednesday and into Thursday in the northwest. Increasingly focused, though, on Cumbria around the mid to latter part of this week. And it's going to be mild everywhere.
Yes, good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Muroki. We're all the way through until midday with loads of top stories, loads of top guests, and all of those big issues as well.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with your views on the usual GB views at gbnews.uk, and we'll be reading those throughout the show. But first, it's time for the latest news.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 11 o'clock. £5.9 billion will be made available in the upcoming budget to help tackle NHS backlogs across England. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is set to announce that £2.3 billion of that will be used to fund community diagnostic centres. They'll be used for tests and scans to try to get down waiting lists. £1.5 billion is also earmarked for increased bed capacity and new surgical hubs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says Scotland's in a unique position to act as a bridge between gaps in conversation between world leaders. She says global pledges must be backed by credible actions, as so-called face-saving slogans are not enough.
We'll work to ensure that leaders of my generation understand that failure to act now would be a betrayal of young people right around the world. There is a lot at stake in our city. over the next 3 weeks. There is no doubt about that. This may well be the world's best, but also possibly its last opportunity to avert climate catastrophe.
The ultra-low emission zone is expanding in London from today, now covering a quarter of the capital. Drivers of older petrol or diesel cars will have to pay £1.50 a day to drive into the zone. The Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, says the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution. Elsewhere, Insulate Britain has restarted its road-blocking protest this morning, despite the risk of members being jailed or fined. The environmental group is targeting Canary Wharf, reportedly obstructing the Limehouse Causeway. Another group of protesters has targeted Liverpool Street. Injunctions have already been imposed on some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson says they will continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. The Home Secretary says it's completely unacceptable for anti-vaccination campaigners to be harassing members of the public outside school gates. Priti Patel's comments come after Sir Keir Starmer called for councils to be able to use exclusion orders to prevent anti-vax protesters targeting schools. Sir Keir called the intimidation of children sickening. He added the uptake of vaccines among children is far too low. Shadow Education Secretary Kate Green has told GBNews police could be placed outside of schools.
These are about actually being able to prevent activity at school gates. It's not about catching criminals after the event. It's about stopping activity that is causing concern at school gates. And I'm not saying that they will be needed in every case, by no means, but it's important that we have the full range of legal measures to make sure that children can get in and out of school peacefully and safely, and that where there are parents wanting their children to be vaccinated, of course, they can have those vaccines.
And Friends actor James Michael Tyler has died aged 59 after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. The actor, who played coffee shop manager Gunther, revealed in June that the disease had spread to his bones. The actor's representative says he died in his home in Los Angeles. In this archive interview, he said he never knew how big the show was going to be.
Kept my job at the actual coffee shop that I was working at as a real barista in real life the first 4 years that Friends ran. I would shoot maybe 2 or 3 days a week on Friends, and then I kept my shifts at the real coffee shop. So I go in there, and people would walk in and do a double or triple or quadruple take, and often say, "Gunther, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "What would you like? You know, please, can we hurry this thing up? You know, a latte, cappuccino," but it would blow people's minds.
I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour. Now, let's return to the Point.
Good morning, everybody. It's just after 11 o'clock now, and you're watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. And we've got a full final hour for you. We might even be going live, apparently, to a press conference that apparently has only just dropped with Boris Johnson, so we'll be taking you to that potentially in about 13 minutes or so. But here's what else is coming up.
Yes, will the Health Secretary implement mandatory COVID vaccinations for NHS staff, while medical professionals could be next in line for the no jab, no job policy? And we'll be asking for your views on this.
We will, yes. Now, the Prime Minister is holding a Children's Climate Summit shortly, and we will be heading live to Downing Street for all of that. Apparently, journalists aren't allowed to ask questions, but children can. I wonder if we'll be able to tell the difference.
Hey, that's us, you know. And the EU are continuing to hold Britain hostage over Brexit. That's what some are saying, and British scientists could be the latest victims of the protocol fallout. We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme. But first, Patrick gives his views on the government's COVID Plan B.
I don't know about you, but I miss the days when Plan B was just a wrapper. Now it's a system of increased restrictions that could be rolled out across England. Plan B would essentially mean vaccine passports in some settings, and mandatory mask wearing as well. And the government, of course, could issue advice on us to work from home. Now, I got an Uber this morning and the driver said to me that she was waiting for a customer outside King's Cross on Friday and British Transport Police were checking people in the back of taxis to make sure that they had masks, and if they didn't, they were hauling them out. Now, obviously, I haven't really had time yet this morning to verify that with the old BTP, but they may well deny that it ever happened. But it was interesting my Uber driver said that, and it's a weird thing to lie about, isn't it? I'm concerned that we're hurtling towards Plan B without too much need for it. We're testing more people than any other country in the world, so our case numbers are rising, but our deaths are largely the same as the rest of Europe. But I'm also concerned about where the real clamour for increased restrictions is actually coming from. It seems to be coming mostly from unions, left-leading media outlets and scientists that have been so consistently inept that they might as well play in central defence for Manchester United. You've got the BMA calling for it, but at the same time they're calling for a GP strike. So some cynics out there may be forgiven for thinking that it's actually just a work-shy establishment with political motives and not a body of people who care, well, frankly, about how many bodies there are. The Education Union, the NAHT, are kicking off and suggesting that there should be a return to homeschooling. Pretty much all of the questions at the latest press briefing were accusing the government of being too slow to enforce more restrictions. I just can't help but feel that the push for additional restrictions may be more politically motivated than grounded in actual fact. You may not be aware that Independent Sage includes members such as Professor Gabriel Scally, who donated £20,000 to Andy Burnham's campaign and has shown his support for Keir Starmer. Professor Susan Michie, dubbed Stalin's nanny, is a key member of the Communist Party of Britain. Professor Anthony Costello described himself as to the left of Jeremy Corbyn. I could go on, ladies and gentlemen. And then let's have a look at who's doing a lot of this so-called factual predictions and given airtime to across the media. It's good old Professor Pants Down, isn't it? Neil Ferguson, who's been wrong so often, he makes weatherman Michael Fish look like the Oracle. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day, but not old Neil. He said that cases may surge to 100,000, possibly 200,000 a day. And they did seem to peak at a lot less than that during our terrifying first wave, didn't they? But recent research modelling from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine suggests that infections will soon peak before declining sharply in the winter without us even implementing so-called Plan B. Now, I'm worried that Plan B could lead to Plan C, and I'm worried by how increasingly authoritarian some of our politicians have become and given in to even the smallest amounts of increased restrictions, I think, could be a slippery slope. Just look at Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, saying we now have a situation where we know where the unvaccinated people live and that we should be doing door-to-door vaccinations. Well, Anna, you're welcome to come and knock on my door anytime.
Yeah, I think hello. I think it's important to. Independent Sage is not Sage, the body that is advising the government. And they're, a fake sort of questionable...
Sage.
Yeah, they're fake Sage. They're a poor tribute act to the real Sage. And, I do respect the real...
Like Mickey Bubble, who I had round as the Michael Bublé impersonator at one of my birthday parties, yes.
Yes, I guess so. We'll talk about that incident later, I guess. But so, the Independent Sage members are not the people making advising our government. But I think, I've almost sort of, I don't know if given up is the word, I've just become almost exasperated at all the figures and all the prediction and all the modelling that's always thrown around. Sometimes because much of it is shown to be wildly off, and these are people who are very respected medical professionals and, epidemiologists and statisticians coming up with all of this, and they're still proven to be wrong on so many occasions. So for me, I don't think the evidence we have at the moment at all is justified in terms of using that to drive us into a Plan B, let alone a Plan C. Yes. I don't want to see any restrictions come into force at all, quite frankly. But it's very complicated and it is very mind-boggling almost all of the time.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's just that question of trust, isn't it? If we are listening to certain people who've been consistently wrong before, it does beg the question why we are doing that and why we should trust them this time. It's almost like the medic who cried wolf, isn't it? But anyway, Health Secretary Sajid Javid is hoping to make COVID vaccinations mandatory for all NHS staff. And we've got a lot of your views on this, actually. GB Views at gbnews.uk. There's actually been quite a few people saying that they're not happy with the idea of there being mandatory vaccinations. Find it so hypocritical. People who want their children to have vaccine that's okay, but people who don't want the vaccines for children, they should be fined. This is basically an anti-vaxxer here, Hillary, I believe, who's got in touch with us. So thank you very, very much. Where do you stand on the notion of mandatory vaccinations for people who work in the NHS?
So for me, I think there's a better case for it to be brought in the NHS than there is anywhere else. And sorry, not in the NHS per se, but in people dealing with very clinically vulnerable individuals. So when it comes to social care, which they currently are, you have to be double jabbed at the moment to continue working in social care. I do agree with that because I'm not willing to take the price that you would have to pay if somebody is not, if there is any chance that there's going to be a reduction of a chance that the virus will spread. Yes, they can still bring in the virus, but there is, evidence out there to suggest that you're less likely to spread it. Then if that's the possibility, then I think, fine, then ensure people are double jabbed. I don't want it to go down that slippery slope, as you mentioned, because first it begins with the NHS, then it goes to the next industry, which might be, anywhere where you might be working in a crowded environment, so people who work, at particular venues. That's a slippery slope I don't want to go down. And also there's that moving goalpost element, isn't there? Because first it's, okay, you have to have 2 jabs. And then in a few months, it's everybody who has to have a booster jab. And then a few months later, a second booster jab. So the lack of a clear end date for me and the lack of, a clear justification does make me uneasy.
Yes, I can see that. And there's been a bit of a mixed bag here. Margaret's been in touch to say there should be compulsory vaccinations for NHS staff and for care home staff too. But then, here we go. We've got another one right below it. Brian, I struggle to comprehend even the slightest justification for mandating a vaccine for all NHS staff. They said it's a blatant attack on individual freedoms. And I think that we have to front up to something here, which is that the vaccine, whilst, people, obviously, the vast majority of people want to take it, of course they do. I don't know about you. I had assumed it would be a lot more effective and a lot longer lasting than it actually is.
It is effective. It's highly effective in reducing the disease in an individual. It's about, I suppose, the collective benefit of...
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. I mean, the amount of booster jabs that you're clearly going to have. So the length of time that vaccine is particularly effective for example. I had thought it might reduce more than it apparently does the way that you can pass it on to people. But then, I suppose there's that argument, isn't there? Well, if it was without the vaccine, then we potentially will still be in an absolutely massive mess. So I can kind of see both sides of it, really.
Yes, well, MP Sir Bill Cash claims that British scientists are still being frozen out of crucial EU research due to the ongoing disputes regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol. The veteran Eurosceptic argues that this frees out against the UK's agreed participation in the £80 billion research programme Horizon Europe. He said, with each passing day, the opportunities are missed. British institutions are left high and dry while science marches on without them, and the returns on our financial contribution edge lower.
Yeah, so we are joined now by Dr. Mike Galsworthy, founder of Scientists for EU. Thank you very much. Well, where do you stand on this sharing of scientific data, then? Should they not be doing it with us?
It's not sharing of scientific data, it's us being full partners on the science programme. So this year is the first year of Horizon Europe, and we are now not a full member of the EU, but an associated country, which means that we're waiting to be signed on to the full thing so we can participate as we were before. Switzerland's in a similar kind of situation. And the frustrating thing is that, yes, like you just heard, the research commissioner has indicated that it's going to be hard to sign us on while foundational issues such as those around the Northern Ireland Protocol aren't still fully resolved on both sides. So, yes, it's very frustrating for scientists.
Yeah, I just wonder whether or not there's a little bit more wiggle room available here. We are in a pandemic. There are people's lives on the line. Does it have to really be held back by this level of bureaucracy?
I don't think it's a level of bureaucracy issue. I think it's just a real politic issue, which is basically we don't have the automatic power to just be there as we did before. We've lost, if you will, a chunk of sovereignty there, and we are sort of beholden to whatever the EU want to do. Now, I would suggest that we look into the legalities of this, nevertheless, as to whether it's right that the EU can do that, how much the foundational agreement that is the Northern Irish Protocol and then the trade deal sits on top of that actually does impact this. But I think what we're just looking at here is just real politics dynamic.
We don't think it might have anything to do with the fact that when we were first looking to get vaccines sorted, obviously we did seem to manage to put a lot of money into procurement, and that money seemed to go into the research as well. And I think the European Union were a little bit hurt by that, weren't they? Do you think that maybe this is a bit of a response to that?
No, it's got nothing to do with that. It's purely to do with the contractual relationships between the UK and the EU in terms of the whole framework of how we work and collaborate and trade together, and how solid that is, whether it's all intact and good to go.
I wonder whether or not they should want us there a bit more than now. You know, we seem to be world leading with that.
They do. They do, and we actually got quite lucky in that some of the fears that I had about after Brexit, us not getting full access to the programme were squashed because the EU said, no, we can actually have the UK in all parts because you're such a value partner. What unfortunately happened during the last science programme is, even though we were in it for the full duration, because of the uncertainty following the Brexit vote, and we didn't know if we were going to have a crash-out Brexit or not, we actually dropped from joint top spot with Germany in 2016 to, by 2020, being in 5th place behind Germany and France and Spain and Italy, and losing out on approximately 1.5 billion. So the anxiety in the science community is that we want to get back in, be full partners and get back to the top spots where we're leading all of these programs. And any delay on time or uncertainty just makes it look like maybe this is shakier than it should be. And that's very frustrating because we're natural leaders in Europe.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mike Goldsworthy. Thank you for your time this morning, founder of Scientists for EU, telling us there about that Horizon programme that we're not too much a part of, as much as some scientists would like to be at the moment. Well, after the break, we'll be in Downing Street as the Prime Minister hosts a children's climate press conference in Downing Street. We'll bring you that after the weather.
Hello. A bright and breezy day for many of us. There'll be some decent sunny spells, but also quite frequent showers pushing in from the west. Even some thunderstorms around, because these showers will be very lively, quite an unstable air mass across the UK at the moment, coming from the west behind this weather front, low pressure to the north of the UK. Tightly packed isobars, so a breezy day to come. The breeze pushing the remaining cloud out of the way from East Anglia and the southeast, but soon enough, showers follow in from the west. Frequent downpours in the west especially, but just about anywhere could catch these showers. And where they do occur, there'll be some gusty winds and even some thunderstorms with some small hail in places. Nevertheless, a mild day to come, 17 or 16 in the south, 10 or 11 further north, and that's where the strongest breeze will be. The showers quickly die away, actually, after the sun goes down in many places, but they'll continue around western shores, perhaps the odd one coming close to the south coast. Then later in the night, the cloud thickens in the west and it turns wet across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That'll keep temperatures up at 8 or 9 Celsius, dipping to 5 or 6 in the east of England, where at least we do have some sunshine to begin things on Tuesday. And we keep that sunshine for much of the morning, but the cloud thickens elsewhere and spells of rain move across Scotland, northern England, into parts of Wales. Some light and patchy drizzle further south, but actually it does dry up a little into the afternoon, although a lot of places stay cloudy. There'll be further outbreaks of rain in the northwest of Scotland, and it's going to be a mild day with this strong southwesterly breeze reaching gale force around northern and northwestern shores. Further spells of rain into the northwest of Scotland on Tuesday night, a lot of cloud elsewhere. And this wet weather sticks around for a time, I think, through Wednesday and into Thursday in the northwest. Increasingly focused, though, on Cumbria around the mid to latter part of this week. And it's going to be mild everywhere.
Yes, morning everyone. We're going to throw you over to Downing Street now for the Prime Minister's Children's Climate Press Conference. Get a load of this.
By the end of this century, we've got to keep it, we've got to stop it overheating. And the only way we can do that is by getting everybody to agree, all the world leaders to agree to reduce their output of greenhouse gases, because as you know, the gases are kind of swaddling the earth like a tea cosy, if you know what I mean by a tea cosy. And they're stopping they're creating this greenhouse effect that makes it hotter and hotter. And the way to do that is to get everybody to commit to reducing CO2, reducing carbon dioxide, reducing the amount of coal that we use, stopping using cars with internal combustion engines, making sure that we have hundreds of billions of dollars to help countries around the world to adopt green technology and to plant gazillions of trees. I mean, I can't tell you the number, but we need to halt and reverse the deforestation of the planet. So we need to plant so many trees that we stop the deforestation of the planet by 2030. So that's the plan for the COP summit. We need as many people as possible to agree to go to net zero, so that they're not producing too much carbon dioxide by the middle of the century. Now, I think it can be done. It's going to be very, very tough, this summit, and I'm very worried because it might go wrong, and we might not get the agreements that we need, and it's touch and go. It's very, very difficult, but I think it can be done. And I think if you look at what the UK has done, we've cut our own CO2 emissions massively. We've cut coal emissions massively. When I was a kid, when I was your age, 80% of our energy came from coal. Do you know what it is now? Anybody? It's about 1%. So we've got solar power, we've got wind power, we've got all sorts of ways of producing energy in a more carbon efficient way, in a more green way. But listen, that's what we've got to do. Now I'm gonna go to you, because you're all journalists. Is that right? Yes. And this is the dangerous moment now, when I'm going to ask you to ask your questions, and then Tanya and I are going to do our best to answer them. So let's go first to Alice from Liverpool.
When COVID happened, we reacted quickly and treated it like an emergency. Why are we not doing the same for climate change?
Right. Well, Alice, thank you very much, and that's, I think, a very fair criticism of the world, because I think that people are a bit, they don't think about it with the same urgency, perhaps as with COVID, and they need to. And the scientists were right about COVID, and I think that they're right about climate change too. They're right that this is a problem that is really dangerous for the planet, and we need to fix it. So we are getting as urgent as we can, and we're trying to get the whole world to focus and to agree on net zero by 2050. And if you think about it, it was only a couple of years ago that the UK, we were the first country in the world to legislate for net zero. And when we took over the running of the COP summit, I think about 20% of the world had committed to net zero. We've now got 80% of the world's economies committing to it. So we are speeding up. But Alice, I share your alarm about where we need to be. I think world leaders really need to grip it now. And the people who are worried are the people in the small island states in the developing world, places like Bangladesh, which face potentially catastrophic flooding as a result of climate change. So we've got to be urgent on their behalf. Tanya.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps PM, if I may add. Alice, that's an excellent question. The science is telling that this is an emergency and we need to take action now as well as in the future. We know we've got lots of innovation, lots of commitments, but what are the actions that world leaders are taking right now to ensure that we're not putting too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? But also, what are we doing that can help it in terms of...
Right, well, Boris Johnson there delivering the world's most chaotic
heroes
geography lesson.
Helping to tackle
that seems to be a room full of children being told about climate change.
Yeah, and getting the chance to ask the Prime Minister questions, which is quite exciting, although that girl there seemed quite frightened after she asked him a question.
Yes, well, there you go. I suppose it was an interesting setup. What that was worth anyway. Moving away.
Yes, well, so-called ultra-low emission zone is expanding in London from today and it will now cover a quarter of the capital. The £12.50 a day charge to drive in the new zone will generally apply to petrol cars registered before 2006 and diesels registered before 2015, though motorists are being encouraged to double-check if their own vehicle is compliant online. Well, Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, says the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution. Our London reporter Alice Porter spoke to one man who says the ULEZ will damage his business. Here's what he had to say.
I work as a quality control welding inspector in the energy pipelines and installations sector. I drive all around the country and work all over really. But I just recently secured a contract in Tottenham in London and I've been there a few weeks now. And just only in the last week or two I got a letter through the post saying I'll be subjected to the ultra-low emissions zone charge at £12.50 per day.
And what was your reaction when you got this letter? So you only found out about the expansion just 2 weeks ago. And what was your reaction when you read the letter?
It was like, oh, you know, it's an extra... the actual £12.50 daily was quite a shock. It's £60 a week extra for me to go to work. What with rising fuel costs and everything else, it's pretty much an extra tank of fuel a week. I got a little bit of an uplift with this contract and that's now been completely taken away by the extra charge. It's been tough times for everyone through COVID and being self-employed and trying to keep working has been quite tough as well. So I'm at the point where I don't think I can at this moment afford the extra cost of buying a new vehicle to suit the emissions. You know, it's being a one-man limited company, there's no guarantee of work. The money's fine if you keep working, but I don't have the benefit of holiday pay, sick pay, etc. And so the added cost will be a burden.
And we're standing just by, we've got the North Circular Road just here. So, and we've got, this is your van, and this is the van that you'd be taking in on this journey, coming into London, how many times a week?
5 days a week, and there will be overtime work at weekends, so the cost is daily, so any overtime will incur the cost of the ultra-low emission zones as well. I use the van basically to carry my own equipment and PPE and to do me travel basically. I've had it for 5 years now and only just recently paid off the finance and was looking forward to having a year or two of not the monthly cost of paying the vehicle off, so I'll have to look at now purchasing a new vehicle.
But of course, I mean, the Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, is wanting to do this in order to improve air quality in London. Obviously, you live outside London. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's reasonable, given your line of work?
Fair in the long run, but to be penalised so quickly, I was unaware of the extra cost coming in. Only, as I said, a letter come through the post 2 weeks ago. So it hasn't really given us time to prepare and maybe look at alternative methods. But certainly in the long run, I see the benefit. But a grace period for people like myself would most certainly be welcome.
And just what sort of difference would spending £12.50 a day mean to you as a small business owner?
It just means profits are low, really. I'm not high. And I'm a limited company, but not a big corporation with, you know, sort of big funds coming through. I'm married with 2 children, and without the benefits of being permanently employed, it's certainly an extra burden and money I wasn't looking to spend.
Yes, well, thank you very much for bringing us that report. Now, after the break, we'll be talking to a former police officer about the controversial new police bill going through the House of Lords. But first, it's time for a quick look at today's news.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are the latest headlines. £5.9 billion will be made available in the upcoming budget to help tackle NHS backlogs across England. On Wednesday, the Chancellor is set to announce that £2.3 billion of that funding will be used to try to get waiting lists down. £1.5 billion is earmarked for increased bed capacity and new surgical hubs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. Elsewhere, Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says Scotland's in a unique position to bridge the gaps in conversation between world leaders. She says global pledges must be backed by credible actions, as so-called face-saving slogans are not enough. The average UK petrol price has reached an all-time high at 142.94 pence a litre. On Sunday, prices beat records set in April by 0.46 pence. Meanwhile, diesel prices reached 146.5 pence a litre. The RAC is calling it a dark day for drivers that will hurt many household budgets. Insulate Britain has restarted its road blocking protest this morning, despite the risk of members being jailed or fined. The environmental group is targeting Canary Wharf, obstructing the Limehouse Causeway. Another group of protesters has targeted Liverpool Street. A spokesperson says they will continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. You're right up to date. I'll be back with all of today's main top stories at the top of the hour.
Morning, everybody. Right now, it's time to delve back into the terrifying world of my inbox, isn't it? GBViews at gbnews.uk. We just showed you there a bit before Boris Johnson giving a lesson, I suppose, to a load of children about climate change, taking their questions, which is interesting. What on earth is he doing talking to kids that have no age, no experience and limited knowledge of this? It's ridiculous nonsense. This is according to Kim. So that's obviously
I suppose
Kim's
it's just
view.
a nice thing to do to show you're engaging the country's young in the climate conversation. They looked very young, so I'm not sure the extent to which they should be necessarily. But I think we can show you some of it now, actually. So that was him that was about 10 minutes ago, roughly, 15
Yeah.
minutes ago. Oh, this is live. This is live. So he is still actually at the conference as we speak. That's him taking those children's questions. When they wrote it to the children, you'd be able to see how young they are.
Yes, there's no journalists in there questioning Boris Johnson, by
No.
the way, just the kids. So what could possibly go wrong? But there we go. Patrick, very few of people would deny that the climate change is happening. It always has and always will. What is debatable is whether this is simply natural or man-made. And I think that's Reg there saying that essentially, you know, maybe there should be some more scrutiny over that. Maybe you should be allowed to have that opinion. Maybe you should be allowed to have two different versions of science, not just one version that seems to be impacting all of our policy. But what do you all think?
Yeah, keep your views coming in, GB Views at gbnews.uk. Now, a group of former police commanders, senior officers and advisors have written to Home Secretary Priti Patel to express concerns about some of the proposals in the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which is in the House of Lords. And they're looking at that bill today, actually. The bill aims to overhaul the criminal justice system as part of the government's efforts to make the streets safer. However, signatories, including Lord Paddock, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and Leroy Logan, who was the founding member and first chairman of the National Black Police Association, have said in the letter this bill has dangerous implications for the fight against serious violence, an issue that demands police work in service to, not against the communities facing its harms. That's what they're saying in that letter.
Well, former Met Police Officer Chris Hobbs is with us now. Thank you very much. Chris, what are your views on this particular bill then? Are there frustrations with it for you, potential pitfalls?
I think it has some merits. I would have liked to have seen some more consultation with serving police officers, not retired police officers of high rank, but those on the front line that are having to deal with protests and that are having to deal with the stabbings and shootings that sadly are a part of everyday life, certainly in London. So what they say, yes, of course, it's a view that has to be considered. But as I say, I think there's more pertinent views for those who are literally trying to save the lives of young men on a daily basis on these streets of London and other major cities.
Today, we're seeing Insulate Britain, for example, coming out onto the streets to cause more disruption on the roads in a few places. In central London today, there's been lots of protesting and demonstrations over the last couple of years for various issues. And one thing people are saying is, actually, there's the provisions in this bill, they're clamping down too strongly on freedom of expression and the right to protest. What do you think of that?
I'm not sure. It seems one of the provisions that upsets people is the fact that if there is a march, a procession, at the moment you don't have to give police any notice. If it's something static, you do. I can't see the problem in organisers of marches saying to the police, well, we want to stage a protest this Saturday. We'd like to sit down with you, discuss what needs to be done and get permission from that protest. Police don't want to stop peaceful protests. Excuse me. The problem is where you've got these protests that spring from nowhere that leaves police often struggling to get enough resources there to deal with them. So I don't think it's unreasonable for protesters to be required to give a bit of notice to police. Sometimes, of course, protests, if something happens, you might want to organise a protest that evening. I think police will always make allowances for that. Police want to see peaceful protests. I don't know a police officer that doesn't. But I think perhaps at times, as we're seeing with these Insulate protests, it leaves police struggling really to deal with them, to actually catch up, get the resources there to deal with them. And I think the public really want to see something done.
I suppose an argument against that would be the way that they policed the Sarah Everard vigil, where there were those quite horrific images of police essentially trampling on women, and then you compare that to how they're dealing with, or not dealing with in some cases, Insulate Britain. And you see you're shaking your head there, but I mean, police were trampling on women, Chris, to be fair. I saw it.
Well, you say that, but to quote Sky News, they did a very good timeline on that. And in actual fact, they traced it right the way back through the day with Mark White, who's now with Your Good Selves. And it really wasn't quite like that. The vigil was very peaceful up until 6 o'clock. The police went in very quietly and politely said, look, you've had your vigil. COVID regulations, you've really now got to disperse. It was all done politely, mainly women officers, and then all of a sudden sections of the crowd turned on the police, started abusing them, saying we're not going. Certain ringleaders were whipping the crowd up, and then police moved in more people to disperse the protesters. There was only one person that ended up in police custody that night. There were 7 arrests, 6 of whom were de-arrested when they gave their names and addresses. So I think it's a bit of hype, and as I say, Sky News did a very good job in dismantling that hype, and if you ever work with Mark, I'm sure he'll tell you all about it.
Well, no, I just fundamentally disagree with you about that, because I actually know a lot of people that were there, and they gave me first-hand accounts of what their version of events were, and also, I mean, there is photographic evidence and some video evidence of it, and so I do have to disagree. But what I would say is, some people would say that if you allow police to enter, you know, and have even more powers, I suppose, could it create a lot of distrust between the communities?
I think most protests do pass off peacefully. There are some protests where people involved really do want to promote and instigate violence. I'm not sure that is going to change. I think peaceful protests will continue. I think as far as the people who have sort of signed the letter, I think one of the things they're worried about, and you might want to move on to it, is issues around stop and search. Where you can, or where police will have the power to stop and search someone who's got a previous conviction for possession of a knife. I think in terms of community concerns, the people like Brian Paddick and Leroy Logan, that's really what concerns them, I think, rather than giving notice of a protest.
Yeah. Well, Chris Hobbs, thanks for joining us this morning to discuss that police crime and sentencing bill, which is in the Lords at the moment. Yeah. Now, it's expected that the Chancellor will commit almost £2 billion towards building new homes on derelict and unused brown land across England. Around 160,000 green energy homes could be built in some of England's struggling towns in an attempt to revitalise post-pandemic Britain. 100 small green spaces called pocket parks could be built as well to help the government reach its climate change goals. The Chancellor will announce the full budget plans on Wednesday night.
Yes, well, we are joined now by Ben Southwood, former Head of Housing, Transport and Urban Space at Policy Exchange. Thank you very much. Just talk us through these plans, exactly what could be going on.
So you explained it very well just there. We have lots of brownfield around the UK, but in some cities, like in London, the price of land is so expensive that all brownfield will get used up if it can get planning permission. In other cities, the remediation costs and the cost of using it are such that greenfield is often preferred. But as you've probably seen with the struggle over the planning bill that's coming through soon, lots of people oppose greenfield development around their cities. And so brownfield is usually seen as a less politically controversial option. So the Chancellor will be trying to enable some of this more costly brownfield to be remediated and used for housing to avoid that question.
I think one question people will have, because we hear this so often with every government, that they promise to build us all homes, tens of thousands or whatever it is, hundreds of thousands a year, and it never does seem to be enough. So, yes, the Chancellor is expected to commit this £2 billion towards building these new homes, but will their targets be actually met, do you think?
I think that on this specific policy, the target might well be met. But if this ends up being, say, 160,000 homes over 8 years, then that would only be about 10% increase on current house building figures. So it wouldn't be a gigantic sum. I agree with you that what that suggests is there need to be new measures. I think the government agrees with this as well, which is why, of course, they're bringing through a planning bill by the end of this year. You may have seen earlier this morning on GBNews that Steve Baker was on talking about his Social Market Foundation report. I think that's a very good report. It has some of the ideas that I've been working on. I'm now head of research at Create Streets, and we have a paper out tomorrow looking at how the Chancellor's bottom line could be affected if they bring through one of the measures in that SMF paper, which we've also worked on, called street votes. And this is the idea that in addition to all these excellent brownfield ideas, individual streets could get a vote. And if they wanted to, and they voted it through, they'd be able to increase the amount of density on their streets. That might mean turning from a street of detached houses or semi-detached houses into a terrace. In some areas, as we know, with how people use their permitted development rights to extend, people are very willing to increase the size of their property because it's so valuable in that area. So we think that could be another way to add.
Yeah, just talk me through that a bit, and to excuse my ignorance here, really. So, if I had a detached house in somewhere like Hampstead, a boy can dream, and then what? I could vote along with the rest of my street to slap another house in between my house and the one next door. Is that right?
That would be one way of doing it. Another way would be if it was architecturally unremarkable houses, say in outer London somewhere, then you might even prefer to demolish and build into a 2-storey terrace. Often that would mean that you could have 2 times as many houses. You keep one for yourself, sell one off, your quid's in. Or alternatively, you could use the space to put your kids there or something. Obviously, people will have all different kinds of ideas of how they want to use it. Now, this isn't going to solve housing problems on its own. No, I don't think anything is. But it's like the Chancellor's idea today. It's one thing that can, by getting lots of different additive ideas that individually make a difference, together you can hope to have an overall bigger impact.
Wow. Well, Ben, I tell you what, it's not a bad idea. I just wonder how many people, because there's quite a lot of NIMBYs in Britain, aren't there? How many of us are actually going to vote through to have more neighbours? You know?
I think NIMBYs, we can treat it kind of unfairly. I think people quite rightly understand that there might be a cost to them of new development coming near, and so it's reasonable that they often tend to oppose it. But that's the thing. They get just the costs, but none of the benefits. In this example, they would get both the costs and the benefits. So they're going to say no 97% of the time anyway. But even if they said yes 3% of the time, that's going to be tens of thousands more homes per year. And you've got to deal with the small percents on things like this. People who try and solve it all with one massive blow, it doesn't tend to work. But if we can just think of lots of tweaks that together will make a nice influence, that's the sort of thing we work on.
Well, Ben Southwood, thank you for joining us this morning. Former Head of Housing, Transport and the Urban Space at Policy Exchange, and now with Create Streets.
Yes, indeed. Well, a pair of trainers worn by US basketball star Michael Jordan have sold for a record £1.1 million at auction.
Yes, Jordan had worn the red and white Nike airships during his first season with the Chicago Bulls in 1984, and that was the same year that he and clothing brand Nike began their collaboration to create his signature brand of clothes and shoes, which are, of course, Jordans. So those are the shoes there. We thought we'd finish on a lighter story.
I mean, yeah, do you reckon they've washed them at all since? Do you reckon the value would be decreased if you washed Michael Jordan's sweat out of it?
I mean, £1.1 million. I do wonder whether that goes actually goes to. But look, you know, sports fans will do anything sometimes to get a piece of sporting legends, so it doesn't surprise me.
No, absolutely. I mean, they're probably about size 15 as well, aren't they? So he's the only man alive him and Shaquille O'Neal are the only 2 men in the world who can actually wear those shoes.
I'm sure they'll be framed somewhere in a very expensive bulletproof frame or something. Yes,
probably. It is like owning history, though, isn't it? Yeah. So there you go. Well, anyway, would you spend 1.1 million? But there we go. Anyway, well, look, loads of you have been getting in touch throughout the show. We've been very grateful for that. Thank you so much. GBViews at gbnews.uk. It's been great to hear you. There's a lot on the government's climate change plans. We saw Boris Johnson there essentially delivering a bit of a rubbish lecture to a room full of kids. But anyway, the government's ideas for zero-carbon heat pumps electric cars are complete nonsense, according to Ray. They're basing their targets on today's technology. I think what Ray's suggesting there is maybe one day in the future humans will find their own way around climate change. We will adapt, maybe.
Yes, but then again, I also don't want the government to make policy based on something that may or may not happen in the future. So that's probably a road I don't want to go down.
Right, we're going to do nothing about it whatsoever and just hope that one day someone sorts it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe you could argue that's been their policy on the NHS for quite a while, actually. But anyway, look, that's it from us here today at To The Point. Thank you, everybody who's been tuning in. But don't go away, because up next we're going to be joined by the wonderful Gloria De Piero, who'll be giving you the briefing. And there's loads to get stuck into today as well, because you would imagine she'll be talking about the budget that's coming up very soon, increased costs to the NHS, increased money given to the NHS, and of course the wonderful COP26.
Yes, indeed, and we'll be back with you tomorrow. So we'll leave you with Gloria for now.
Hello. A bright and breezy day for many of us. There'll be some decent sunny spells, but also quite frequent showers pushing in from the west. Even some thunderstorms around, because these showers will be very lively. Quite an unstable air mass across the UK at the moment, coming from the west behind this weather front. Low pressure to the north of the UK. Tightly packed isobars, so a breezy day to come. The breeze pushing the remaining cloud out of the way from East Anglia and the southeast, but soon enough, showers follow in from the west. Frequent downpours in the west especially, but just about anywhere could catch these showers. And where they do occur, there'll be some gusty winds and even some thunderstorms with some small hail in places. Nevertheless, a mild day to come, 17 or 16 in the south, 10 or 11 further north, and that's where the strongest breeze will be. The showers quickly die away, actually, after the sun goes down in many places, but they'll continue around western shores, perhaps the odd one coming close to the south coast. Then later in the night, the cloud thickens in the west and it turns wet across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That'll keep temperatures up at 8 or 9 Celsius, dipping to 5 or 6 in the east of England, where at least we do have some sunshine to begin things on Tuesday. And we keep that sunshine for much of the morning, but the cloud thickens elsewhere and spells of rain move across Scotland, Northern England, into parts of Wales. Some light and patchy drizzle further south, but actually it does dry up a little into the afternoon, although a lot of places stay cloudy. There'll be further outbreaks of rain in the northwest of Scotland, and it's going to be a mild day with this strong southwesterly breeze reaching gale force around northern and northwestern shores. Further spells of rain into the northwest of Scotland on Tuesday night, a lot of cloud elsewhere. And this wet weather sticks around for a time, I think, through Wednesday and into Thursday in the northwest. Increasingly focused, though, on Cumbria around the mid to latter part of this week. And it's going to be mild everywhere.